All right, I think I'm going to kick things off here. I'm sure we'll have a couple stragglers that join us here, but want to introduce myself, Jennifer Miller. I'm a partner at Cat Sapper Miller here in Indianapolis and on our Indianapolis ACG WIT committee. So want to welcome everyone to our first ever Great Lakes Capital Connection joint women's event here, Founders Forum. So excited to have you guys here. I did briefly want to plug for those of you that are local here in Indy that we do have an in-person WIT event coming up on June 21st at Woodland Country Club. It is a joint event with Executive Women in Finance, a golf clinic and happy hour event that we've had the last several years and has been a really big success. So would love to see some new faces and familiar faces as we get to meet together in person here in a couple of weeks at Woodland. So with that, I want to turn it over to Xana Bass, who is our immediate past ACG Indiana president and also been active part of the WIT committee. So I'll have her introduce our great guest speaker today. So thanks, Xana.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is Xana Bass. I'm a partner at Curriculum Capital. We're an investment bank headquartered here in Indianapolis. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have our speaker here today, Marina Waters. Marina, alongside her husband, Chris, founded, built, and grew Luna Language Services into one of the largest language services businesses in the world. And also, actually, it's weird, Marina, talking to you now because we used to talk every day for about a year because they recently went through a very, very exciting transaction. And we are looking forward to kind of jumping into that later. Welcome. Hey, Marina, how are you?
Hi, thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I see hardly any faces and a lot of screens. So I told Xana I was going to do this. If everyone could just if you want, you don't have to show me your face for a quick second. if you don't mind, I would just like to say hi. Because it's so weird to talk to. Oh, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you. And it's really wonderful to see your smiles. That's what I needed to see before I started talking.
I want to make sure I say it correctly.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, Xana.
That's awesome. Well, we'll jump right in because we've got a lot to talk about. And we specifically like to talk a lot. So it's gonna be good. So we'll just jump into the very beginning. All right. So when you joined Chris, your husband, as the second employee and co-founder of Luna back in 2006, the larger interpretation services industry was very much like the Wild West. A lot of kind of informal freelancers, not a lot of training, kind of just going in and interpreting. What were kind of the early challenges you had in those early days?
Yeah, that's the Wild West is a great way to put it. It was, especially here in Indiana, those of you that were here about 25 years ago will remember the demographics were shifting, right? We had a lot of diversity in terms of our population pouring in. And so our challenges in that space was trying to figure out standards. We were entering into highly regulated spaces. Courts, hospitals, places that had a lot of standards when we didn't yet know what ours were because the industry was sort of new. And so we had to figure out that lane and look really professional really quickly. And we had to recruit people off the streets, literally, because what would happen is we'd get a call from a hospital that said, we need a Punjabi interpreter or we need an Urdu interpreter. And it was Chris and myself, and we didn't know, large communities of Urdu speakers, but we'd have to go quickly find one. And so we were on the streets, literally on the streets, going into stores, going into restaurants, passing out our cards, recruiting people, and then trying to get them up to speed. It was fun and challenging, but I think because we had this sort of agency model, 20 years ago, we were walking in and telling people, hey, we'll pay you $25 an hour, 2-hour minimum. And then we would just charge $50 an hour. And so it's we knew our costs we covered, and that was a good earning for people back then. And so it was a challenge, but it also was it was exciting. It was fun. It was a lot of energy.
Yeah, and then like, so at what point is it just like goes beyond like you and Chris hustling, right?
Yeah.
What was that moment where you're like, hey, this is a real, sustainable business with like huge growth potential? What was the moment? It was like, this is not just us kind of, hey, we've got a nice niche, but like this is going to be a real big thing.
Yeah, I know you've asked me that question before, and it's real hard because when you're in the moment, I mean, that's kind of like, I don't know, like people have kids, like at what point do you know they're going to be like, they're going to make it? I mean, I don't know that you ever really know. You just hope. And there's good days, bad days. And on the good days, you hope, you get enough energy and hope and momentum. But, year after year, day after day, month after month, we were growing because the demographics were continuing to shift. And so the more diverse our communities became, the more we grew. So we had this built-in growth potential. We studied demographics early on and got on top of that. And so we actually could predict in ways like we knew emerging communities here, and we knew that there would be a need for our services as long as those communities grew. I guess it was like, the time when we realized, okay, I don't need to go back and practice law again. I used to practice law, and there's kind of like a moment we looked at each other and we're like, I think we can cover expenses. I think we can buy a second car. I think, like we can actually maybe get an office. There's these like moments that you look at each other and like, okay, I think we can do this,
Yeah. Well, that kind of really touches on like, the life of an entrepreneur, right? I think the thing you guys always so eloquently said was, we grew like responsibly, right? In terms of like, there's all this demand. You're also benefiting from like federal regulations, Title VI, that like it's a right for people to be able to have language access, right? You're benefiting from diversity and inclusion initiatives. This has like become a very like, it wasn't always like this, but it's continued to become a very thing, but you can't be all things to all people. So, talk to me a little bit about like the challenge of like growing responsibly when business is coming at you everywhere, and it's exciting, but like you also don't want to go too big too fast.
Yeah, I mean, we had an agency model, which I love. Like if I ever start a business again, I'm going to do that again because there's this built-in security where you control a lot of the people on the call are in service industries. I mean, you have to charge more than you spend, than you pay out. We were early gig economy. We were gig economy before it was a word. And so we were working with contractors. We weren't hiring more employees than we could afford. And that was by design. You can't employ, today I could hire a Burmese interpreter to work full time and I could fill all that need. But 20 years ago, if there was an obscure language from Africa, I couldn't fill all those requests, like every day. So we had to use contractors. And that agency model is so beautiful. And I think it's why a lot of businesses are thriving right now. Yeah. You see a lot of people being able to open up shop through that model. And it really helped us. It really helped us cover our costs and be mindful about our operational growth. But in terms of our human resources, we could add in more as we grew without, always knowing we're going to be able to pay them. Because again, we paid them $25 an hour, 2-hour minimum. We charged $50 an hour. So from the get-go, we just always knew that was our margin to sort of work with.
So, but one of the challenges then when you have a contractor employee base largely, right, that is controlling, quality and putting in the process and procedures. And that really is what differentiates you. You were one of those early movers of like, listen, we're not just going to be gunslingers out there. We've got to really get certified in certain quality measures. And you led that effort in terms of like really professionalizing the business. Talk about kind of the thought process behind that and what were the kind of key steps you did to make that happen.
Yeah, I think I I had my legal background, and so I had been trained and been training others to learn standards and uphold them. And I was sort of attuned to the risks if we didn't, because I was aware of those regulations we were entering into. So I think that was sort of like the why behind it. And then the how, that's a lot harder because it was like so on the fly. And like you said, there weren't like, it was like the early days of nursing, where there was probably like really high demand, but the actual training programs hadn't been very well developed. It's still like that. Early days of nursing were like 2-year degrees, maybe 4-year degrees. They weren't advanced degrees. And interpreting still like that. There aren't that many undergraduate programs. There are very few graduate degrees in interpreting. So we had to literally find small groups that were creating standards and buy into them. And many times just create them ourselves. So luckily we were working with a deaf community, and they used American Sign Language interpreters. And that is one space that actually, because of the ADA and because of the advocacy around that, they had much more developed standards than what we call the spoken language industry. And so because of the ADA, because there was so much attention around it, we did have that one subset of sort of providers, of linguists, that we could model ourselves after. And so we did. And we really leaned into those ASL linguists to inform sort of like the standards for our Swahili interpreters, for our Burmese interpreters. And we just sort of had to train them and provide like quality checks. I mean, it's not always perfect, but you do your best, you do your best.
That's great. So culture, I know you in the beginning flashed up a slide of your employees, which is one of the most diverse companies, that I've ever met. And I also think like culture is a super big buzzword right now. Everyone's talking about it, culture, retaining people. Out of all the businesses I've ever really encountered, like Luna really is like practices what it preaches. Like you have such a unique mission-driven culture. I mean, how did you cultivate that? Like, I mean, really is your secret sauce with such a diverse workforce?
Yeah. So I mentioned I used to practice law before I started this business, and I worked as a staff attorney at a university, and I was sort of like in a legal practice group inside of that, and it was run by a bunch of big egos, like Harvard trained big egos. And I'll never forget, like the dean of the law school came in. She saw how stressed out I was, and she took me into her office and she showed me her desk. And then she showed me, I mean, this is terrible, but amazing. She showed me how she'd like get under her desk to take a nap when she was working too long, or to cry. And like, she kind of like gave me permission. And I was like, wow, okay. And oh my God, this is terrible. Like, this is just terrible. And so when we got the chance to kind of like create our own business, I just wasn't going to repeat that, right? Like, I was going to create a place that I wanted to be, that I wasn't, that I didn't need to get under my desk to literally like suffer and cry, or that sort of thing. So that was sort of like the why. And then the how is we hired within the populations we were servicing. We hired immigrants, refugees, deaf people, hospital administrators, people who worked in the courts, people that were using our services, and by doing that, we ended up with this incredibly diverse environment. I have my therapist actually years ago that I was seeing taught me this analogy about a cake and like the icing on the cake. And that so many things in life, we try to like put a nice icing onto a cake that was big. And Oh, someone, okay, thanks. I've been a part of like recently, last few years, initiatives around inclusion and diversity, and so many of those, are so important, but I see them as like icing on the cake of their organization. And we had, in being part of those, I realized, oh my gosh, having that built into the recipe while you're baking your cake, it really, really establishes something special. And so, we had like in the kitchen, if you will, people that were from countries all over the world, different cultures. We didn't look the same. We didn't speak the same language. We didn't think the same way. And I see it as science. It's like inside of any organism or organization, diversity is what withstands evolution. Like we know that's science. And so by us creating an uber diverse organization, I feel like we withstanded the test of time. We could evolve, we could shift because we weren't all groupthink. We weren't all thinking the same. And so I really, my soapbox about diversity is that it is it is the business plan. It is what will like catapult you to the next level. So the culture that we built, it's really special, but it is only because we are so diverse. And so I think whenever possible, when people are starting out new organizations, new initiatives, to think of that as like baking it into the cake.
I love that analogy. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a good segue into kind of the recent transaction we just completed. It feels now like it was a long time ago, but it was really very recent. And when we were talking at length about kind of the beginning of like preserving the company and the culture, you were very upfront, like that's a huge priority for us. It's not just about, it's important, but it's not just about the dollars, it's about who we're selling to and if they believe in the mission, Like, how did you approach a deal or transaction, the transaction with that in mind? Like, what were you kind of looking for?
Well, first of all, I'm going to pause. This isn't in the script, but I just need to say, Sam, like working with you, and if anyone in this group has not worked with her professionally, like it was a total privilege because you had incredible grace and grit. And so I knew what I needed going into it, but having a strong other like you there to help guide us, to help remind us what was important. I mean, I've talked to other organizations that have done it alone, and I don't know that they had sort of like someone to steer the ship. So
I didn't say her to say this, by the way. No,
no, you didn't, but I have to say that because
that's really kind.
It was really, I think having someone there allowed that we knew was kind of steering, allowed us to focus on what was really most important to us. Okay. And so that, like, as you said, was, a cultural fit. So how did we know? Well, like we were looking for organizations that led with value statements. Yeah. Not that like our culture had to be the same, but they needed to feel like values and culture were important to them. Because if they had that own self-awareness, then they would be mindful of ours. Like I'm not naive to think I'm going to go out and be able to find like a company as diverse and as committed to communication. And I mean, another thing that I think I should mention, I didn't before, is like we really developed our organizational structure off of feminist models. Yeah. Like I kind of tried to flip the org chart intentionally. And so it wasn't just like we had a diverse staff. We did things differently, like in terms of our communication. I just needed to be sure whoever was coming in to partner with us
Yeah.
was going to be self-aware enough to know that our values, that our culture was important. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I was looking for. I don't know what you saw, but I saw like a group that came in and did that.
Yeah, and I think that this was a very weird thing that, like, when we had management meetings, we had several groups come in, and after their meeting, is, Globo, who ultimately acquired Luna, everyone knew. It was kind of like, that's the group we want to work with, and you kind of just had that feeling. I think you brought up a point that I want to touch on. I don't want to glide over, but how different this process is just from being a woman owner, and I don't think we had any other females really come in. And then also your leaders in your organization, your next level down is also predominantly female, like just like you said. How different was this process, from that perspective of really being a female founder?
Okay, well, I'll sound like a broken record. Having one beside me in the process was very helpful. Having you there, watching you interact with peers that were all male. Again, that balance of like grace and grit, that's just how I'll describe you forever.
I love that.
Having worked with a lot of, like I said, big egos in the past, like it was reminiscent of that. I just had to go in and feel like I needed to own my staff, put away that imposter syndrome, put away the feeling like we're just still faking it, all that stuff that goes through all of our minds, maybe more so as women, I don't know. It was a little bit of like, okay, I'm not in my little safe bubble at Luna.
Yeah, it's
We're
different.
out in the real world. And it's different. There were some moments, but you saw those moments. And I think if anything, they made me feel stronger. Like, I think you'd be better at answering that question about like what it's like to work in a space that's predominantly male. My space isn't, but yeah, the acquisition space was. And I just think you got to be true to who you are in every moment, in every single moment.
And I think we were really thoughtful about when we put together materials, really leading with the culture and really being thoughtful of who was asking the right questions up front. So making sure, but regardless, when we had these meetings, like I said, from a buyer standpoint, there was no females that showed up, right? They were all, it's sometimes a different communication level. And, it was really important that we asked those tough questions up front before they came and met you guys. Cause I remember my number one fear is bringing in a group that you would just be like, I hate these guys. Like that was like we were very cognizant of that, that it had to fit from that perspective as well as from a value perspective.
It still happened a little bit. So
let's not lie. No, come on. Let's keep the good vibes. Let's keep the positive.
Yeah, no. As long as we got to where we needed to get, but yeah, no, it's a dizzying process to go through to give up the idea of giving up or sharing, a child, really, an organization that's a child. Finding the good parent is, how do you do that in a few hours or a few months? But that's why, like for us, going back to leading with values, so the company that we ended up partnering with, their motto is the future is empathic, like that is their motto. And so for us, to your point, yeah, it felt like going on a date, a great first date, just like, oh yeah, love at first sight, like when and I'd hope that for anyone going through this process is that they have that moment, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The aha moment. Like this is I feel better about this.
But don't you feel that like when you watch the process, do you see that happen? You said that to us. You're like, these are the guys, like these are them. And we were thinking the same thing.
I try to be objective, right? But like, I think it's more than anyone, that was out of like 5 or 6 meetings we had, that was just like, you could just tell from your
They
energy
had to make sure.
and your excitement that it was going to be a fit. But, I want to touch on like the sale process is a very grueling 9-10 month process, right? And we talk every day for almost a year. What would you say sitting in the chair now when you had like a great outcome? What one like surprised you the most? And what do you think you had done like for other business owners, like what you had prepared a little bit beforehand, God made your ducks in a row before we jump into it?
I think what surprised me the most was just the sheer exhaustion. I had gone through law school. I'd practiced international law, like around the clock. We had done a 24-hour business model here with Luna. I thought I knew exhaustion. I thought I had endurance. And then like, I would say 3 or 4 weeks into due diligence, after financial diligence, I got a call from the other side. It was Matt. It was like one of the people on the business teams. And he's like, hey, yeah, are you ready? Like the marathon's about to start. And I'm thinking like, what? I mean, didn't we just do that? Like, wasn't that the months leading up to this? What about the last 3 or 4 weeks? Like, how can the next 6 weeks be the marathon? And then of course, like I'm so naive. I didn't really understand. Like life as I knew it needed to stop for like maybe several months. And so I don't know how you coach people into that, but I have little kids. I have parents I'm taking care of. Like I'm used to juggling a lot, but I didn't really understand the gear we were going to need to get into. So that was I'm not saying you didn't warn me, but I just didn't internalize.
Until you experience it. Yeah. Until you experience it, it's different.
Yeah. I don't know how you all do it, but then the thing I would have done differently, which I'll stand behind this, I do wish I told some key employees earlier.
Okay.
In despite the advice otherwise, the thing that is true to our culture is like transparency. We were always very transparent with our people. We had people who had started, key employees, second hire, third hire, fourth hire. We waited too long to tell them. We told them before the deal was done, but we still waited too long. So going backwards, I would have pulled in like a few people. I would have pulled them in because it just, it was fine in the end, but I feel like we had some painful weeks, just regaining trust, regaining confidence. It's hard to go into someone when you've had like first love with a new,
and they don't
company, and they don't know them yet, and they feel like, hey, that's our relationship. You are like, you meaning me and Chris, you guys are ours. What do you mean you've fallen for someone else? You guys struggle with that a lot. I mean, it's an emotional process, and you are more than anything like very close to your employees. But it's that balance of how much can we let in too soon, but also do we want to carry this whole weight on our shoulders the entire time? And they would have been helpful to have some of those people through that process. Ultimately, in our perspective, we kind of leave that call, to the owners. We have some owners who want to tell the whole company the day we sign LOI, but it doesn't always work out well, and you want to make sure that you keep the core base. But you guys, I feel like, struggle with that decision more than others. It was the biggest struggle. And I'll tell you, I got some amazing advice that was absolutely true. And maybe a lot of you've heard it, but the advice I received is like, anytime you tell people about a transaction, an acquisition, big change, I think you could like fill in the blank, tell them about a blank, big, huge change. A lot's going to bubble up. Their past experience with abandonment, with whether it be like divorce, death, grief, it's just gonna like come on up. And there's nothing, almost nothing you can do to prevent that. And thank God someone told me that because it sure as shit did, like for everyone, almost everyone, like to the point where people said, I don't know why, but I feel like I did when my parents like split up. I don't know why, but I feel like I did when my dad died. Like they were able to vocalize it. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. Okay, I knew this was going to happen. But it was a lot. And I'm glad I knew it because whether it was like rage or fear or whatever, I was able to sort of step back, listen with like a compassionate mindset and be like, okay, it's not all about this, it's about other stuff. And I just think it's great advice to give anyone as they're entering in the process. Like, no matter when you tell people, if it's early on or the day after,
Emotional.
it's emotional. And what comes up is going to be the baggage they're carrying. That's okay. It's just got to be aware of it.
Yeah. Well, I think what also helps in the situation is like you and Chris are a phenomenal yin and yang. Like I don't, everyone on here, like Marina and her husband Chris are like marriage goals. I don't understand how if I worked with my husband, we would not be married. Just 100% facts. I mean, be honest though. What is it like building and working with your husband every day?
Yeah. I have to flip the script a little bit. Like, I think working with my husband, I'll say with Chris Waters as a human being has helped our marriage. And we had the privilege of actually like working together before we got married. So, we knew our marriage would work because we knew we were able to work together so well. Again, it's sort of like flipped. And I get this question kind of a lot, like, how do you guys do it? And the things we learned really early on is that we learned we needed to compartmentalize frequently and that we needed to provide space. 3 things, like compartmentalize, meaning like something's so effing stressful, but we need to go attend to this instead. So we're going to bury it and like lock the door and then go do this. And then this, that's just life. Right. And then the space, meaning like, sometimes we're in a meeting and he says something and it's like, what did you just say? Oh my God. And like, I can't respond in that moment. And I'm like, okay, I'll deal with that later, give it a little space. And sure enough, like when later comes, it's not that big of a deal. Is it worth bringing up? No, it almost never is. And that's, that's business, but it really helped in our marriage because when things come up in our marriage, I'm less likely to respond in that moment. I'm like, okay, let me just give that a minute. I'm going to go do this. I'll come back to it. And by then it's like, I don't want to battle. So that was good. And then the real true key to it was that we always differentiated our roles. Like we knew our lanes, we rarely crossed over. And I would say that to any couple or any partner, because it's not just like marriage. It's not just marriage. There's a lot of partners, married or not, that will go in to start a business. And there is a little bit of a, it's a diagram and there's some crossover, but the more you can differentiate, have different lanes, give each other full agency in those areas, the better it'll be. And that's what we've done. I love the cat. Hi, Kitty. That just made my morning. Anyway, we like to think like we're a whole good employee, one of us, together, because he's got sort of like this incredible financial mind. And I've got like kind of like the legal communication, marketing mind. And so together, we were a good leader, really. It's not always that way. That was just how it's worked out for us.
Say you're really rare, and I would react in all of those situations that you show patience. So to me, problem though, we'll work on that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I want to touch on this. I want to leave time for Q&A, but I want to touch on this. We're now a few months out, you're still of the transaction, you're still kind of helping and all that, but there isn't kind of an end in sight down the road. Ultimately, like, this is like your baby, right? This has been your life for the last 20 plus years. I mean, what do you think you're going to miss most about, the day to day of running this business?
Luckily you warned me about this question, so I don't get emotional. No, it's the community. It might be like a lot of us might be going through this, like post-COVID. It's human contact. It's a baked in community on a daily basis, whether you need it or not, or know you need it or not. There's something year after year, day after day of like getting up and going somewhere and being around other people and touching them and seeing them that for me has kept me balanced. I will really miss that. I'll miss the baked in community of people. And as we've mentioned, I have very diverse people that work with me from Senegal, from Afghanistan, from cultures that I don't cross over on a daily basis. It's hard for me to go out and seek those people in my other communities,
Yeah.
So it's hard to go out and find a friend who was raised in Middle Africa and whose father literally raises lions. Like, that's my colleague. And for me to go out and find him on a daily basis is like, I have to really work for that, right? Because our communities, the way our cities are set up, there is a bit of the integration isn't all there.
Yeah.
So I will miss that. I will need to seek it out. Luckily, like, just our cities are diversifying anyway. So, there's more and more opportunities to meet people from other countries, to ask about their lives. In our schools, young children are their classrooms are so much more diverse than they used to be, their families. So I'm just going to have to be more intentional about that. The human contact thing, that's going to be hard in virtual offices, but we're all struggling with that, right? We all have that challenge ahead.
Well, I want to leave the chance for a little bit of Q&A. Marina, thank you so much. I'll still do it once a week, so you don't miss me. So we'll just.
You keep saying that, but you're a busy person. You're a busy woman.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear from the people on the call, like, not even just a question, even some experiences that you all might have had that came up, and during this hour, like, I can learn from all you too. And because this is a new forum, it's hard to get people to ask questions first. So.
Do we have any? Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions.
I'll ask one. So how did you know it was time to sell? Like, what in your mind was like, okay, I'm ready to step back and take a new chapter?
Oh, that's just like a great question, Stephanie. Thank you. I think that it's very cliche. You hear there's like there's startup people, and then there's, the next people. I don't know what you call them. What do you call them, Z? What do you call the next people? The operators, growers. I don't know.
People to grow it to the next phase. Like, you kind of grown it pretty.
Yeah.
As far as you felt like you could take it.
I think we realized we just didn't have the skill set, I think. And we knew that because we were getting more and more and more stressed. We were sleeping less and less and less. And there were just problems we couldn't solve, even though we were, continuing to hire and continuing to invest. Is like, the problems just get bigger, at some point. And we needed to get out of the way. We knew that. And that's, it's kind of hard because a lot of people we were like figureheads here. And so it's like, oh, we're going to hire a new CEO and just kind of, I don't know, leave. Are we going to like take new roles? ultimately we're too connected. We're too, yeah, we're like enablers here. So we needed to like get out of the relationship a little bit and really like trust, send it off, find someone who has, you know, big business. I mean, and to give you some context, and it tells you also like how small our industry is. Like we, Z can tell you this more than we are, but we're just under 20 million revenue. And, you know, right now we're about 70 employees, about several thousand contractors. So it's like, we're not a small company. We're kind of a mid-sized company, but we're not a huge company. And gosh, it takes a different skill set to be huge. And also, it wasn't my ambition. It wasn't Chris's ambition. And so like, because we didn't have that ambition to do the things that we needed to do to make the company expand in a way that our employees needed, that the community needed, because the demand's still there, that the industry needs, because it's like starting to roll up. And if we don't do that, we might get left behind. We just had to do it. But ultimately, it was like lack of sleep and stress that got so high that we're like, we can't do this anymore. So I think it's like, how do you know you need to end any? Well, your balance is off. Your stress is high. It's interfering with your ability to find joy in your life. Like those are the signals. It's like, okay, this has gotta change. So it's interesting, like people have left our company, you know, we've had a really good retention rate, but you know, some people left, especially after COVID, and we watched them go through it. Like key people who are like, yeah, I mean, I need something different. And then here we are, we're like, oh, we need something different too. You know, and it's hard when it's your own company to be a human, like to say, oh, I'm still a human with needs. And my needs aren't the same as the company. You can only do that for so long. My needs are that I need sleep and that I need less stress. So, you know, it was personal. It was a personal decision, survival, you know. And COVID did help. COVID helped us all have that reflection of, okay, what changes are in our own control that we can make to bring more balance to our life. I don't know. Any other questions?
You want me to keep asking you questions?
Do you have any plans for the future?
Well, isn't that the question that everyone asks me? I'm still the president at Luna until the end of this year. Chris and I stayed on during a transition. We have equity in the bigger company. And so we are going to sort of be on as advisors. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I am entering the Bardo. Does anyone know what the Bardo is? Has anyone heard about the Bardo?
No.
It's very helpful. It's a Buddhist term. I'm not Buddhist, but someone told me about it. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's like intentionally going into the unknown. It's like the unknown. And so it's like, if you do it intentionally, it's like, okay, I'm going into the Bardo now. I know I got to be here. I got to stay here. And then once you're there, then you can like figure out what you're doing next. So I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to create a defined period of not knowing. Like I've committed to not know until the end of this year. And then once the year hits, I think I'll commit another 3 to 6 months. But no, I don't know. And I'm choosing that intentionally, but it's a hard thing. I'm not quite there yet. I don't know yet.
Jump in, like, I mean, so like the future of the language services industry itself is like, it's going gangbusters right now. And you've been such an advocate of like, you know, this is more of a mission of like language access is a right. I mean, do you feel like you see yourself? I feel like I see you doing it, being more kind of a greater community advocate for the core mission of Luna, like not just formalized, but like so good at speaking
Yeah.
engagements and doing stuff like that, or on the political aspect of it and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could use some coaching, so I might need to have some more calls around that. But yeah, I mean, if those opportunities present themselves, I mean, I think there's a lot of organizations that are trying to continue to adjust to our diversification. And they're trying to get that right. And if they're really on top of it, doing it as a strategy for growth, not just as a diversity initiative or inclusion initiative, like, yeah, I have opinions about that, but because we're so attuned to the demographic shifts, we've seen them. We've seen, we know those are coming, going to continue to come. So yeah, there might be some opportunity there. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll just keep jumping in because this is a new question, so I don't know, but like, so Luna was rare in terms of like most of your, language services interpretation. So you're on site, so you're sending interpreters on site, but the greater language services business is written translation, it's virtual, it's all this stuff, there's technology play. Like, where do you see this industry in 25 years? Like, I think we talked about this a lot. I mean, it's changing rapidly.
Yeah. And artificial intelligence is going to be it's a huge disruptor in it. And it'll be the companies. We intentionally partnered with a company that was a tech company that had a tech platform. It's been 15 years in the running, creating technological solutions in our industry. That was a strategic choice on our part. We're humans here. We're like human services. So the industry is going to shift, much like you see medicine shifting, like more and more telemedicine, more and more digitizing medicine, if that's a thing. It'll be a little clunky because places like healthcare, legal spaces, education, all those spaces, those are actually like kind of the last spaces to evolve. It's like the commercial space that evolves quickly. Those places are a little slower, right? There's just like more regulation. There's more at risk. There's more at stake. Getting the language perfect, very precise is so important. And it's still gonna take, years to get that right to that standard. However, like, I don't know the answer to artificial intelligence and how it's going to totally disrupt things. I sense there needs to be a human robot balance, like we all are hopefully looking to find, but I don't know. And 25 years is, that's an eternity. See, that's like as long as we've been in business. So 25 years.
I'm just, throwing it out there.
Yeah, no. And in that time, what is like, will we be an English first country? Probably not. Likely not. Our country will probably look a lot more like Europe, like the continent of Europe, which is like very multilingual by design, established into, societies, 3-4 languages. I predict that that's how our spaces will be. Our schools will start operating in many more languages, eventually businesses, so you'll see more of a shifting, and the actual employees will be more multilingual, right? So also baked into the cake will be more people who can shift into Spanish, into Burmese, on the fly. They won't need as much of an interpreter there as like bilingual workers. So businesses like ours, we're looking at ways that we're not necessarily coming in as an afterthought. We're coming in by design in the beginning, we're in the process. It's more like we're learning more skills so we can come in and service more roles inside of an organization. So, how is AI going to affect all of us? Who knows? It's kind of scary, but also exciting.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say that I wish I could like have lunch with all of you. I bet you this is a really cool group. I didn't really know about the group, but when Zainab told me about it, I can imagine you're a bunch of amazing humans. And so, you know, it's an honor and a privilege to come and be with you all and speak with you today.
No, thank you so much. It's always, I mean, you're always just so refreshing and so put together, and really appreciate you and the kind words. And I mean, this was great. This is a great chat. Great start to my morning. Hope it was a great start to everyone else's morning. Appreciate you guys all
Yeah.
joining.
Thank you.